someday.
Oh, someday.
Say action when I'm ready to go. All right. Good evening, good afternoon, everyone joining us online, whether it be on Facebook or on YouTube for our Social Justice and Me program. This is an important community conversation that we are happy to be hosting here at the Gethsemane Seventh Adventist Church. We're going to be talking about race, equality, our youth, so many things that are important in today's climate. I am Elder Nehemiah Mabry. I'm happy to welcome you at this time. We're going to get started momentarily, but first, as is our custom here in a household of faith, we will enter this time with a word of prayer. So wherever you are, Facebook, YouTube, take a moment, bow your heads for a word of prayer. Father God, Lord, we just thank you so much for this opportunity, God, to come together in this place, virtually and even together. Despite all that's going on, Lord, we ask that you would be among us, wherever we may be. May this be a conversation that is edifying to all that are involved. We pray that we will leave from this time educated, informed, but most importantly, may we be empowered, Lord, to be your representatives in our community, however you call us to be. We thank you so much. Bless every aspect of the program to come. Bless every single person watching online. We pray in Jesus' name, amen. Amen, amen. All right, so for our first segment of this event, of this conversation, we're going to be having conversations with law enforcement. And so to introduce our first presenter, I would like to bring up one of our elders, Elder Mackenzie, at this time, to introduce who our first presenter will be.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am William Mackenzie, and I feel honored to introduce to you our presenter for the first segment of our program. Scott Flowers is an experienced law enforcement professional who has worked from a patrol officer to a trainer. He has trained law enforcement professionals from the local agency to the federal. He has presented on active shooter mass casualty training and the relationship between law enforcement and the community that they serve. And so this evening, we are privileged to have Scott Flowers with us. So ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together as we welcome Scott to Gethsemane Seventh Adventist Church presenting to us this afternoon.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me here. Again, I feel honored to be a part of this conversation. If you guys bringing me in here, the biggest thing I'm seeing right now, I was talking with Mr. Mackenzie a little while ago. Guys, what has brought forth the events lately is tragic. But I also look in Romans where it says, we know that all things work for the good of those that love God. And I see a great blessing coming out of this. Well, Scott, what are you talking about? Well, the fact that I am here, the fact that you guys are here listening to each other, asking the questions, I see blessing coming out of that. Because so much of what we call racism, a lot of it comes from misunderstanding. A lot of it comes from ignorance. And a lot of times it takes somebody not afraid to ask that awkward question or to be willingly accept that awkward question without being offended to clear up that ignorance. Otherwise, we go back with our misconceptions, our misunderstanding, and our point of view, and that's where we're at. Addressing law enforcement specifically without knowing your specific questions, I do want to say this. From a law enforcement point of view, I hear a lot of people say, well, why did they shoot an unarmed man? This person was unarmed. This person, all he had was a water gun. He didn't have anything in his pockets. Guys, let me give you the standard by which the Supreme Court holds law enforcement. And if you're welcome to look it up, it's in a case called Graham versus Connor. So it was decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. And basically what they said is this: you cannot look back with the grace of 20/20 vision, with everything that you know now, calm down and make a decision to hold that officer to your standard. You have to put yourself in that officer's shoes. You have to know what he knows. Know what he knows. You have to have the experience that he experienced, the setting that he has, play all of that, and then determine if what is, and this is important, a reasonable person would feel an imminent fear for their safety or life. Imminent is a fancy lawyer word which means fixing to. It's fixing to happen. So let me give you an example. If you're in a dark parking lot at 3 o'clock in the morning in a bad part of town and you're by yourself and you see 3 people, dark figures moving to you, and I mean dark like shadows, okay? They're moving to you, they're starting to surround your car. Are you going to feel a little uneasy? Absolutely. A reasonable person would. That's kind of putting what a reasonable person in that situation is. So let's put it in real life. If a law enforcement officer is dealing with somebody, one, understand they don't know you. They don't know your background. They don't know your history. They certainly don't know what's going on in here. So they have to form that assessment on the street at the moment with all the junk that they're carrying, and they have to make their own judgment. And the number one thing with a law enforcement officer is we're going home at the end of our shift. That's the reality they face. It's drilled into our heads that you could lose your life. Make sure it doesn't happen to you, and it's not going to happen to my brothers and sisters on this shift. I'm going home. So as I approach that, I'm assessing things. And I will tell you, as a law enforcement officer, if I'm out with a subject and I don't know him, I can be a very nice, welcoming, respectful person, but being friends with you is not my number one priority. What's my number one priority? Going home at the end of my shift, okay? So I may not come across as the nicest person, and that's because I need to know, are you a threat to me? Don't tell me you're not a threat because I don't know you. I can't believe what you say. Are you a threat to me? Once we determine that you're compliant, cooperative, you are not a threat to me, then I can be more cordial to you. And some officers never make that transition, and that's an individual decision. Now, as far as the imminent use thing goes, let me break that down for a little bit. If I'm encountering somebody and I don't know them, let's say I could have a call that's saying there's a suspect with weapons. Okay, weapons is a big key. That means there's a threat to my life or somebody else's. Suspect may have weapons. Well, if I'm encountering this guy and I'm getting a lot of verbal, what I call interaction, where he's not verbally cooperating, not necessarily giving this information, that goes into my notepad of things that aren't working well. And let's say I say, show me your hands, and he starts digging into his pants pocket and turn around, okay? And I'm going to do this. I'm going to turn around, and I go, what? What does that look to you like? A reasonable person that's training for that, that could be a gun. That could be a $5 bill. It could be anything you want to. But let's freeze it right there and put it in the hands of the officer. And let's say that officer in that moment has that split second to decide, am I in an imminent belief that my life is in danger? Are you with me so far? Okay? Most officers would say yes. A reasonable person would feel fearful for my safety. So if somebody comes at me like that or is fighting for me and making me think that they might be presenting a weapon, I don't have to prove that you have a weapon. I just have to prove that you put me in that belief reasonably. Reasonably. That means that if I took you and put you in the same situation that I was in, that you would feel the same way. Does that make sense? That is when deadly force is allowed. Now, what does that mean to me? If you are not a police officer, just understand the thinking that an officer has come through. An officer, you know, we're all people. We're all broken. We're all sinful. We are held to our own priorities, our own motivations, and yes, our own biases. And everybody takes that standard a different way. You know, what's fearful to you may not be fearful to me. I may have encountered somebody that looks like you before, and personally, I haven't realized that I kind of have a bias against that. But what it means is if you're stopped by the police officer, understand on the street, they could be a jerk, They could be doing things wrong. But unless your life is, again, let's go back to this, a reasonable person would feel that your life is in imminent danger, that's not a battle you're going to win on the street with the officer. I hear stories of officers that do things wrong, that they're just jerks. They stop people for no odd reason, and a lot of that's based because they know you're ignorant of the law. However, on the street is not a battle you're going to win, okay? The best way to do that is try to document as much as you can. You can ask for a supervisor to be on the scene. I will tell you, not all departments require a supervisor to be there. The officer you may be with may be a supervisor. He may be the watch commander for the whole street, and there may not be a supervisor. The other supervisor may be at home in bed or on vacation. You can ask for a supervisor. You can ask for another officer to be present. If you have cameras, nothing says you can't turn on your camera unless they need to see your hands, okay? Cooperate. Repeat. If you don't understand what they're asking you to do, say, sir, can you please repeat what you're asking me to do? But cooperate is the best thing that you can do. Now, when it's done, that's when you go back and you write down your statement, you coordinate with what you got, and you follow up, much like in a court of law. I know that doesn't seem fair, but as far as safety goes, that's the best advice I can give you guys. I know this is such a broad subject. The other thing I wanted to touch on is, you know, my kids, I have 3 kids, and one of my kids asked me the other day, they said, Daddy, if you could have any superpower in the world, what would it be? And first I was like, man, it'd be cool to be invisible or to be able to fly, you know, how cool that would be. But in today's age, the greatest gift I think anybody could have would be able to take a time and walk 100 miles in the shoes of the person you're about to encounter. What does that mean? That means I wish I could understand everybody I encounter, understand how they've been hurt, how they view the world, how they've been treated, and how they view me. And that's hard to do, but it starts right here with us. It starts with me, it starts with you, it starts with you. Well, what do you mean? Guys, just like this, we take the time, we have to empathize and understand, okay, well, now I understand where this officer is coming from a little bit, but as a former officer, if I'm stopping somebody, I have to sit back and say, okay, this is an African American. I don't know their story. They don't know mine, but there's a good chance they feel threatened and may feel that I'm dishonest. And not take offense at that, but to prove to them that, hey, I am trustworthy, I am honest, but I still have my job to do. Does that make sense? Okay. And guys, that's pretty much, I know that's short and sweet, but that's pretty much the presentation I have. Do we have any questions?
Scott, thank you for your time, your presentation. I know my fellow panel members here, as well as those watching online, will have some questions, but thank you so much for that presentation. To kick things off, and we'll see who has something else, but one of the things that you said that struck me was that, you know, you have a priority to make it home that night. In fact, you said it's a number one priority, and that, in fact, is something that I understand as a father of 2 girls. Definitely don't want to not make it home at night. But I think the struggle is, for people in my shoes, is we've always been told that cops were public servants, that their role is to protect and to serve. And so when I hear the, you know, number one priority to make it home that night, that seems to be, for me, not the same thing as someone who's here to serve me. Because if I know that that is your number one priority, then I'm wondering, may I be a casualty in you reaching your number one priority? Or are we approaching this conversation where, hey, this guy is here to help me? Those don't always seem to be in alignment if, in fact, one is a higher priority over the other. So you mind speaking to that? How does that play when I am understanding that your role is also, that you took an oath to protect and serve me as a person of the community?
Right. Absolutely. Very, very good question. The dichotomy that I'm seeing is, how do I put this? In order to protect and serve human A, sometimes it means protecting them from human B. There's a lot of violence where people are trying to hurt people. So our goal is to protect and serve the public within the law. However, when we're dealing with the lawbreakers, they're not necessarily, what's the best way to put this? We need to arrest the criminal fairly to stop the threat, to protect one from the other, whoever it is, and make sure that we don't get hurt at the same time. Now, where does that come into play? Let's look at the George Floyd thing. I'm not well versed on the merits of why he was being arrested. I understand it was a counterfeit bill. To me, not a nonviolent crime. They did their job in as much as they arrested George Floyd. I'm assuming they had probable cause to do so. But once it was done, they still have an oath and a duty to protect and serve even the criminal. What I see with that one, and again, I wasn't there. I don't know everything they know. I don't know, I know what you know. But what I saw was they arrested him. They did not de-escalate, which means they didn't step back and say, okay, it's over. Let's put him back in the car, attend to his wounds, make sure he's okay. They continued the violence against him, and at that point, they went from protectors and servers to criminals themselves. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question, or did you have a follow-up with that?
Yeah, and there's a follow-up. I guess, so in your explanation of protect A from B, at least in that moment, what I find myself as a black man oftentimes is if a call comes, hey, something's going on over here, there's a lot of noise or whatever, my thought is, when the officer comes on the scene who doesn't really know exactly what's going on, how can I not be assumed to be person B? Even if I'm person A, I could be person A all day. Right. But it's a fear of, just to be completely honest, when they first make their assessment of the situation, and let's just say I'm the only black person in the room,
sure,
I don't want to be assumed to be person B first and foremost.
Right.
And so that sometimes is an issue when it's like, okay, I'm not the threat here, but I'm afraid that at first glance, I may come across as the threat.
Because of color?
Because of my color.
Okay. And it hurts me to know that's how you feel, but I realize that's today's reality with a lot of African Americans. The best thing I could tell you is the officer has to determine that you are not a threat himself. Now, making yourself as non-threatening, and here's my specific examples, are verbally cooperate, show the hands, and when I'm looking for, if I go in a situation, I don't think I'm looking at color unless I'm looking for a suspect that was given to me. You know, if the dispatcher says, hey, it's a Middle Eastern man or an African American man or whatever, then I'm looking for that suspect. But what I'm doing is I'm judging your behavior. I'm judging your body language. If you're sitting there by yourself, you're compliant, you're not verbally enticing the crowd or arguing with me or, you know, standing over me with a video camera, you know, those are clues that tell me that this person could be a threat in one way or the other. So, like I said, just cooperate, verbally cooperate. Try and think yourself, how can I best present myself to this officer that I am not a threat? Is that a broad answer to a specific question, or have I answered it? Great, okay.
My question would be, Officer Flowers, is what type of training does an officer receive as far as bias, how to respond to biases? Are you even aware that you have them? Because that would have a determining factor of how I approach the scene. If all things are equal, society unfortunately has it where everything that is black is negative. Black male, black bald, black, whatever the scenario is. So what type of training does an officer receive to deal with his or her bias?
That's a very good question, and that is specific to the agency. Now, in North Carolina, they have training and standards. It's based out of Salemburg, and they dictate, or this year, or even in their original training, they have covered this many hours of firearms, this many hours of, social interaction, stuff like that. There's certain hours that they have to do. Top of that, they have what's called in-service training, where the agency can take, let's say, I'm just going to throw a number out there, 40 hours, and they can fill it in with their own training, With the police department I was in, we did, in the past 10 years, we did a lot of diversity training. But I'm going to tell you something with that. One, it's not well received among the officers, and I'll touch on that for a second. The other thing is it starts in here with the officer. You know, when you're being lectured, a lot of people don't want to look within themselves and realize, hey, I could be the problem. And that takes a lot of self-inflection. And unfortunately, training may work for some, it may not work for others. Why does an officer not receive diversity training well? Well, I'll tell you this. I've been on that side. As an officer, I took pride in my integrity. And I'll give you an example. If I stopped for valid reasons, I would examine my own motives, and let's say they committed a crime, you know, or B crime, or what have you, and then be thrown in, okay, you stopped me because you're black. Well, or because I'm black. As a white officer, I want to say, well, let's look at it this way. One, are you only saying that because I'm white? And two, let's look at why I stopped you. I didn't stop you because of your skin color. I couldn't even tell from I'm driving. I'm stopping you because you're going 72 in a 45. Or I'm stopping you because you have no insurance on your car. You know, let's accept responsibility. Now, does that mean I don't listen to diversity training? No. But what it means is officers are so tired of hearing that you are the problem, you're racist, you're this. It goes on both sides. So for officers to receive, we need to look at the larger.
Because black communities are policed more, so therefore if I have more police in my neighborhood, then does that increase the odds that the numbers are high? How do you determine where to go, and how are these numbers in such great disparity, not just here locally in Wade County, but in the world? How does that happen?
Right, and I can't answer to other than what I've experienced. I probably had to arrest more after I call proactive 80% of the time, and then there's the 80% give me a suspect. And either the call originates in a black neighborhood, which is going to have black residents. Now, for racial equity, I would not be doing my job looking for white people, you know? That doesn't meet the suspect description that I've been giving. So a lot of officers are responding to what they've been giving. I guess what I'm saying is it doesn't mean that blacks are being targeted more, but I think that what is being reported is higher for the African American community. And I don't know if that means that African American.
Challenging is it for him when he's being disrespected by the officer to maintain respect? It's where the person who's in authority is being disrespectful.
That's right.
So how?
Wow, if I had the answer to that one. I'll say this: to respect the person, in order to respect the position. There's a lot of people that are in respectful positions of leadership or authority that probably should not be there, and I cannot give them my respect, but I do respect the role that they've been given, and there's the difference. And I think what it starts as far as a safety, cooperation, don't fight it on this battle that I touched on earlier, is to understand this officer could be the worst human being available. And he's got bad motivations, but he is a sworn officer. He does have the authority to do a lot that I cannot do right now, and I need to respect that and then fight the battle in the court system, or fight a battle in another way and live to see another day. Does that clarify what you were asking? And I wish I had the golden ticket to give you, but that's, from my point of view, that's the best advice I can give.
Okay, I have one. How or when does a person's status change in a traffic stop from a citizen to a suspect in arrest?
Well, it really starts with why are they being stopped? I don't know how many people understand this. An officer just cannot stop you for no reason at all. The standard is you have to have reasonable suspicion. And what that means is and again, you're going to hear the word reasonable a lot when it comes to law enforcement, what a normal person who doesn't eat Tide Pods and their brains in another place, a reasonable, sane person would be suspicious that this person could be committing an offense or crime. What does that mean? Reasonable suspicion would be, I watched you roll through a stop sign. Reasonable suspicion would be, it's 2:30 in the morning, the bar's just let out, I've watched this car drift in and out of traffic, so I have a reasonable suspicion to think they're impaired. So it starts with that. I have to have a reasonable suspicion to think that you are committing either a crime or an infraction such as speeding or something like that. Now let's say I stop, I'm looking at the car, when I light your teddy bear under there, a viewpoint of everything I see in your interactions and what I see in the car. At what point, alcohol, I smell weed, or I don't, but you only open the window that far, that's a clue from where we come from. You're trying to hide something. To the level of your cooperativeness. I will say this, as an officer, I have a right to ask you for your registration. I can go back to my car and punch in your license plate and get your registration. Why do I want to do that? Because I want to see what's in the glove box. I may ask you, sir, have you ever had a ticket before? No, I've never had a ticket before. Well, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to go back to my patrol. Can I trust this person? Are they telling me the truth? If I am thinking you may be a suspect, that there is a probable cause to believe that this person has committed this crime. I see a gun on the seat, or I see a roach, or something like that. That gives me probable cause to believe that there is a crime going on in this car. Does that make sense? If an officer gets to that and don't develop probable cause, they cannot just detain you until they can create or come up with something. Has it been done? Yes, and it's highly illegal. And I'll give you another example. A canine officer. If I'm doing a traffic stop, and let's say I'm writing you a speeding ticket, if there's a canine officer and I want to have a dog sniff around your car for drugs, I can do that. The job I'm doing. If he gets there and I've just signed your ticket and I'm ready to hand it to you, and the canine objective of what they're looking for.
Traffic stop, and I'm acting in an uncasual way, how do you determine if I'm a criminal or if I'm just like a jittery person and nervous?
That's a very good question. A lot of it's going to be based on the officer, be based on their experience. Now, I will say from me personally, but it's in a car. It's really specific to the officer and specific to the scene. But cooperation, it starts and ends with cooperation. Around and do this number. My first thought is not cooperation. My first thought is, oh, you've been here before. What's going on? Why have you been through this practice before? You see what I'm saying? So you've got certain biases and experience that you have to fight as well. Did that clarify? Okay.
Would be in the case of an issue that I have is excessive force. How can they intervene, if anything? Is there anything that they could do to stop an officer, 2 officers, 3 officers from using?
On the scene, I would recommend not, other than calling 911. And unfortunately, problem, excessive force is the force that I use is excessive from your perspective. However, the standard of what I'm held to helps change the view of excessive force. I don't know if that makes sense or not. You could see an officer talking to somebody and immediately slam them on the ground. You're like, well, they were just talking, they weren't fighting, that's excessive force. And from that viewpoint, it is. Let's take the same situation. This officer has dealt with this person many times before, he ends up telling the person that you have a warrant for your arrest for whatever, could be a violent. It kind of does. And along the same lines, as a firearms instructor, I've been asked, people say, well, why do officers, why can't they just shoot people in the legs? As a firearms instructor, you've got 3 people cannot stand here, and let's say I'm aiming for the leg of that chair that's right beside you, sir. It's hard for me to sit right here under control and fire that. Now, my heart rate's up. I'm in a dynamic situation, and imminent use, I'm in reasonable fear of my life. You're moving, I'm moving, my heart rate's going up, and the first thing that happens when your heart rate shoots up is you lose gross motor skill. It's a force all day long. Where I come from, we did not do chokeholds. We were told anything above the shoulders, you had to have the right to use deadly force to use it, okay? That was specific to our department. I believe President Trump recently just signed an executive order outlawing it for the entire country, but as it stands, typically it's based on the department's lawyer and their policies that they're willing to stand behind. So the amount of force is based on the officer's threat. How much force does it take to counteract what I'm doing? So you're allowed to use force under the same guidelines of deadly force only to the point that it takes to affect the arrest if it's a reasonable arrest. So what does that mean? If I'm arresting somebody for shoplifting and you physically pull away from me, I'm allowed to go and use force and what it takes to restrain you and put you in cuffs, and then I have to walk away. It doesn't mean that I'm justified because you physically pull away, pull out my gun and shoot you. That's excessive force, but it's what's considered reasonable. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Okay. A couple things that you mentioned.
Sure.
And again, it's just a matter of what one is accustomed to. Or you suggested that if an officer comes to your window, for me, you said if the window's not rolled off down, then that alerts you that this person has something to hide. And I'm like, I just need to crack it to be able to hand you my driver's license and registration. So we're coming from two different perspectives, and one could be as a female, I'm not going to roll my window all the way down and give somebody access to me. You're going to have to reach your hand and get me. And that's just defense mechanism for me. And then the other unfortunate thing is that as black or minorities, we have to respond cordially, fight in court, when we are already disproportionately unable to financially have that voice in court. So it's like we're set up for failure. And my last question, and it could all be wrapped up into the same thing, is that how can we constantly see minorities arrested, not making it home, and then the gentleman can go to a church, kill 7 people, and they stop him to Burger King to get
Right.
something just not adding up.
Right.
And as a human being, I hate for my intelligence to be insulted. So I'm like, how does everyone who goes through the same training get different treatment? He can't breathe. I'm gonna stop and go to Burger King for the next person. How do we digest that and not be fearful of the law instead of respecting?
Right, and I can't really address on how not to be fearful, but I can give you a better understanding of how it works. I love basketball, and if I'm watching, let's say I'm watching UNC, I'm just kind of giving an example, and I see them go out to the wing, and then they throw the ball back up to the point, and then they go back to the wing, and then they throw it back to the point, then they go back to the wing, and they bounce past it to the center in the middle for a dunk. I'm like, man, that's a great play. We should do this every single time. Every team should do that, and it would be an endless squared work every time. The problem is defenses are going to respond differently. You got different players that think differently, that have different abilities on every single team. And what I'm saying is every person is unique. The suspect is unique. The officer is unique. And you've got their baggage of experience, of fear, of bias, of how they're feeling. And this is on both sides of the fence. So what does that mean with what we're saying here is that one thing we have to do is realize every situation is unique in as much. As far as the Charleston shooter, I wasn't there. The only thing I can understand is that he gave himself up. He chose not to go out in a blaze of glory. I am sure that given the situation, the officers probably personally would have welcomed the chance to take him out then. But when somebody gives himself up, they're no longer a threat, they're cooperating, and that's where they have to place him in arrest and serve and protect him as well, because he has to stay in court. Now, why doesn't that happen with African Americans? I think we have to be careful to put them all under the same loop. There could be situations of where that officer interacting did have an imminent fear for their life. It was a dynamic situation, and even though he was armed, he could have presented himself in a way or whatever. I can't speak to specifics over a broadening. I do know the statistics are alarming, but I guess what I'm saying is you cannot compare apples and oranges because each one is its own separate situation. Now, unfortunately, the training, each state provides their own training. North Carolina has their training that's set forth by the Training and Standards Commission. It's distributed through every officer has to take it, and then there's additional stuff. What officers do in Minnesota or Seattle or even in Arizona is a different level of training. Now, it still has to abide by Supreme Court rulings and stuff like that, but their policies, their level of training could depend on the viewpoint of their administration, their budget, the politics of the locality, everything. And I know that doesn't specifically answer your question, but it's kind of a difficult question to really give a clear answer to. Yes, sir.
I understand we're about to close.
Okay.
Mr. Flowers, just before we're about to close, I just feel really compelled to say, one, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Two, there is a depth of understanding that I think this has not addressed, to be completely honest. And I think that there are individuals that you may know and have access to that lack understanding that could come from situations like this. Right now, our community is in a totally different situation where, you know, understanding what's cooperation and the authorities and the rights are important, but there's an additional piece of we need to know that our lives matter.
Right.
And what I mean by that specifically is we feel like there needs to be an address of the responsibility that we have been on the wrong side of. Because here's the thing by saying both sides. On one hand, if we don't do things right and we come in with the wrong bias, we end up dead. On the other hand, if they come in with the wrong bias, they can end up dead and I can be on the news. It's not quite equal when you talk about where the power is. It's not really the same thing. And so one of the things I just want to leave, and maybe this is a comment, and that would be that I think when there is effort to address and heal and bring about, you know, unity moving forward and even reform, that it's important not to put the burden of adjustment or changes on the person who's hurting the most. And that's where I feel like we are as a community right now, because we have a hard time believing that every time we see a dead person that looks like us, it's simply because they didn't cooperate. And we know that it's individual. We know that we're not saying that we wouldn't dare say that all police are bad. But what we are saying is there is not an equal share of the power, and with much power comes much responsibility.
Absolutely.
So when the conversation begins to say what we need to do, though there are things we need to do in our community, in the middle of a hurt, in the middle of a pain, in the middle of where there's already distrust, I think that is the time where there needs to be more drastic efforts to be understanding on the side of the individuals who have the power to make home if they choose to anyway. And so I just want to just kind of make that comment, and I think there's probably more understanding that I would just humbly request, not only that I see that you're seeking, but also those who probably wouldn't even dare come into this conversation right now.
And I totally agree with you, and I'm analytical in thought. Things do need to change, and I think it starts with identifying the problem. You may view the problem as this. Somebody else may identify the problem as this. You know, I'm hearing from the news, or not the news, the black community saying it's the police. The police are saying, well, no, it's the administration. We've got, you know, Billy Joe in Texas saying, well, you know, if they wouldn't break the law, then they wouldn't have that problem. And the problem is we cannot fix a problem that's not correctly identified. I think it starts right now. I think it needs to happen. I highly encourage, and it starts at the grassroots. I think I highly encourage getting to understand each other. That doesn't mean you have to understand law enforcement. I have to understand you just as important as the other way around. You know, and I'm going to refer back to the Bible. When the Great Commission was given, it started here and then spread throughout the earth. What does that mean to us? We have to look within ourselves, start there, and then start with our friends, start with our neighbors, start with our local community, and go from there. Because the more that we argue over what the problem is and somebody needs to fix it, or we argue over how it should be fixed, and we don't change ourselves, nothing's going to change. But yes, I 100% agree with you. I do.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, our panel. We are over time. We will be taking a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about social justice and equality. We know that this is a huge task to take on in just 45 minutes. For those of you who are tuned in to YouTube and Facebook, we have all of your comments. We have your questions. This was just the beginning. The conversation is going to continue. And we're asking that you please stay on with us. We want to continue this conversation with you at 5 o'clock. We will be answering some of those questions on there. I'm going to ask Scott if he can stick around a little bit to help me get some of those comments back answered. But I just want to thank the panel. Panel, we have a mother, we have a father, we have a young man, we have a young lady. We are praying, we are all in this together. This is not just the touch of this and we keep going. Jamal, we want when you drive that you are safe. We don't want the question to be asked, what happened? So that's why we're doing this. The focus is on our youth, although it addresses everyone, but we want you to know, Jamal, because of you and others like you, we're doing this. All right, we will see you back at 5 o'clock.
I'm a young black man doing all that I can to stand. Oh, but when I look around and I see what's being done to my kind, every day I'm being hard to this prey. My people don't want no trouble. We've had enough struggle. I just want to live. God protect me. I just want to live. I just want to live. I'm a young black man doing all that I can to stand. Oh, but when I look around and I see what's being done to my kind, every day I'm being hard to this prey. My people don't want no trouble. We've had enough struggle. I just wanna live. God protect me. I just wanna live. I just wanna live. I'm a young black man doing all that I can to stand. Oh, when I look around and I see what's being done to my kind every day, I'm being hard to this prey. My people don't want no trouble. We've had enough struggle. I just wanna live. God protect me. I just wanna live. God protect me. I'm a young black man doing all that I can to stand. Oh, but when I look around and I see what's being done to my kind every day, I'm being hard to spray. My people don't want no trouble. We had enough of the struggle. I just wanna live. Please. I just wanna live. I just wanna live. I just wanna live. Come on. You know, we gotta pray. We gotta pray. We gotta pray. Pray for the world tonight. We gotta save somebody, save somebody tonight. Yeah. Fire in the air, what the hell going on? Sirens everywhere, singing that street song. Violence everywhere, barely holding on. What the hell going on? Do you know who you are? Do you know who we are? We're extraordinary people, living an ordinary life. One extraordinary question. Gonna run nobody's, so we gotta pray. Pray for the love tonight. Another day. Pray for another try. Smoke is in the sky. What the hell going on? Bullets gonna fly. High right from the gun. Trying not to cry. Barely holding on. What the hell going on? Do you know who you are? Do you know who we are? from deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday, and we'll walk hand in hand. 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 We'll walk hand in hand someday. Deep in my heart, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. Oh, someday we shall all be free. We shall all be free. We shall all be free someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. We shall overcome. We shall overcome one day. We shall overcome someday.
Welcome back, and we are here live at Gethsemane Seventh-day Adventist Church in Raleigh, where we're continuing with part 2 of our conversation. Part 2 is about race, social justice, and equality. Our guest speakers this afternoon will be Ms. Betty Murchison, who is the author of the Nurturing Parenting Program for African American Families. She's also written the National Training and Consultation for Nurturing Parent Program. Betty Murchison is also on the board of directors for the Raleigh Ongoing Against Racism and the People's National Campaign to Ensure Voting Rights. Next we have Ms. Reggie Edwards. She is the founder of The Encouraging Place. At The Encouraging Place, they also work with race and reconciliation. She's also founded the Pride for Parents program here in Wake County, summer camps for women, and again, actively engaged in our community. Our panel continues to have Ms. LaTanya Jackson. We have Elder Nehemiah Aubrey. We also have Mr. Jamal Kelly and I was going to say Miss Elizabeth Kelly, but Miss Elizabeth Kelly's in the back, Ms. Kalila Joseph. And we will now turn it over to our panel.
Hello, and thank you so much for the invitation. When I looked on this program and I saw that the topic was social justice, I thought, isn't that an oxymoron? How we going to have social justice? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I thought it was really trip. I just thought it was real crazy. Like, really? Like social justice, what? So anyway, I just had to go and give you my confession right there. You know what I'm saying? This is the first time I actually looked up the word. So let's go at it this way. Let's go at it this way. What would you say social justice is? since it was kind of crazy to me.
Sure. I would say social justice has to do with doing what's right by our fellow man, which is what justice in general simply is, but primarily in relations to us, one another as people. Justice in those areas.
Okay, next. Y'all thought we were going to be just doing what talking up here.
Hello. Okay. To me, social justice is kind of similar to what Nehemiah just said, but when I think of social justice, I think of what is right, what is humane, which may not always necessarily be what is the law, because in the past there have been laws that were not fair. So basically, what is humane and equal across the board?
Okay, okay. Let me read what they say social justice is. It says social access actually refers to fair and just relations between an individual and society as measured by the distribution of wealth, opportunities for personal activity, and social privileges. It also says it's the creation of a fair and equal society in which each individual matters, their rights are recognized and protected, and decisions are made in ways that are fair and honest. And I kept saying, I'm trying to find us in here somewhere. Come on. Right. All right. And then the next one says, when someone does not have the same access to these rights and privileges due to discrimination, this is called social injustice. Social injustices occurs when people are treated unfairly, strictly based on race, which comes to racism, age, ageism, gender, sexism, religion, and sexuality, which is heterosexism. So I think the truth of the matter, it felt like social injustice is what we're familiar with. I'm still waiting for social justice. Now, I'm just 68 years old, so I don't know how much longer I got to wait. But, I mean, I really wanted to see, can we know what social justice feels like? What about you?
Well, thank you, the officers and the members of this congregation for inviting us in to share our thoughts and opinions about social justice. And that was a great exercise to open it up, Reggie. I was thinking about where it took me was what Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois said in Souls of Black Folk. And in 1903, he said the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. And I think that's also still the problem of the 21st century. I think we're still struggling with that. And I think many of the social justice issues center around racism. And one of the programs that Reggie and I have both participated in is the Racial Equity Institute. And they have one program called Groundwater. And in Groundwater, we talk about the roots of racism and how it impacts everything in our lives. And when you start to think about social justice issues and how they center on racism, we have to first identify the terms. And I heard an earlier speaker talk about that, identifying the problem. And part of the problem is the language we use. So if you think about racial equity terms, if we talk about racism in, let's say, child welfare, we use the term disproportionality, right? In healthcare, what do we call it? We're going through this COVID-19 challenge right now, and we know that more African Americans are dying of COVID-19 than other races. And we call that health what? Disparities. Health disparities. In education, if there are any educators in the room today, when we talk about the difference between the races with test scores, We call that the achievement gap, right? Call that achievement gap. And then in criminal justice, we have terms for it too. So it all boils down to racism. But we call it by different names so that we don't even recognize we're talking about the same problems. So I think that's very important to first address the terminology we use. So I'm glad that Reggie started with defining what social justice and social injustice is. And I think that's important. The other point I wanted to make is that often our different movements have been led by our youth. And I know the target for this presentation today is our youth. And I am very, very proud of how our youth have been standing up. When I look at the marches on TV and I look at the spokespersons, there was a town hall I listened to the other night, and it was just the young organizers, the young people who were pushing the movement. And I'm very, very proud to see that. And I call your attention to, if you haven't had a chance, there's a documentary and a movie out, but call your attention to the Children's March in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. Those children, Martin Luther King had been in Birmingham trying to organize and trying to get the movement, flowing again. And it took children leaving their schools, going downtown, thousands of them. They started coming in from other counties, but they called it D-Day. And keep in mind, this is before we had these tools right here. We didn't have Twitter and Instagram and TikTok. We had mimeograph machines, and I'm not going to tell my age like Rich did, but if you, oh, I'm right there with her. But if you think about the old mimeograph machine, how we had to run off posters to get them out. They did this by word of mouth. These children told other children, and they had disc jockeys on black stations who taught them coded messages that the children understood what they were talking about. And they kept talking about D-Day. And he kept cluing them in to what they were doing. That's really powerful when you think about it. I know that you guys right now can sit here in just a matter of seconds. You can communicate with the whole wide world. But at that time, it wasn't even really lawful for black people to gather unless you were gathering at church. So these young folks to keep a secret and pass it around. And the documentary is really great because I saw them, they were jumping out of windows when the teachers blocked the doors, and they were jailed for days with no food, and it was really harsh, really, really harsh treatment. But that's what jump-started the civil rights movement in '63, because people watched, if children can do this, we are all called to do something. To become involved. So, and I work with several youth groups. There's one group called the Freedom Struggle Committee. And this is a group of children at Raleigh Charter High School. They are working on a project with the Wake County Truth and Reconciliation Committee. And we're all part of that. And this is all out of the Equal Justice Initiative. If you know about Brian Stevenson and the museum that he started, the Community Remembrance Project, where we're gathering soil from sites where black people were hung in the South. And it's all down in this museum along with their names. It's remarkable, and these children have been down to the museum. Their teachers are working with them, and it's not just that high school. There are several other high schools, some public schools and charter schools here in town. And Reggie and I work with them, just being there to witness it. They're doing the work. They're making presentations before the county commissioners. They are speaking to the school board, and it's just amazing to me. And so we support our youth. We acknowledge our youth, and thank you all for the work you're doing, whether you're just making sure other people have what they need to be a part of the protest, or you are challenging your administration in your schools, or whatever part you're playing, it's all very important. And we want you to know that we understand that we stand on shoulders of folks who came before us and paved the way and did a lot of things to bring us to this point. And now we're expecting you all to take the banner and run with it, and we thank you.
One of the things that gives me hope for where we are right now, the one thing that gives me hope for where we are, because I can say, we've been here before, we've been here before, we've been here before. But what gives me hope today is young people. You know what I'm saying? I said the young people will lead them. Yeah. I mean, that's exciting, because I was in a forum the other day and somebody was saying, is the problem that we don't have a leader? You know what I'm saying? Is that why things are like they are, because we don't have a leader? And I was like, yeah, we do. Yes. Yeah, we do. Mm-hmm. Y'all will be the ones. You know what I'm saying? The old heads, we'll kind of be back here pushing. Like, no, you can't back up. You got to go forward. But I'm so excited by the impact that younger people are making. Because y'all are saying, we don't want to hear that. It is what it is, and we want to change. You know, and just like the Children's March, they couldn't do nothing with them. What did you say? They were jumping out of windows and stuff? They were going because they were bound and determined. And that's what I think the whole world is waiting for. And that's why I think the whole world is awake. Like, yeah, let's get it on. And it's going to make such a difference, because you're preparing for your world, right? You know, because we're going to be, but you are preparing, so you're looking way ahead. So we're excited about how things look to you. As a matter of fact, we're getting ready to do a Zoom forum with just young people, because it's like, what do you want? Because we're saying different stuff than what y'all are saying, right? But you're the ones that's plowing ahead. So we're going to just push you, and it's like, yeah, let's make it happen for them. So I am very, very excited about the direction this time. It feels differently. Because half of the people I talk to are like, I don't know, Reggie, I don't know. We've been here before. And I said, yeah, it was us out there before, right? But this time, we're behind you, and you need to know that. You know, there's a way to do it. Where's this man? He's not still in here. There's a way to do it without going to jail. Y'all know what I'm talking about. So keep on doing it right. Because right for us is different than right for other folk. Come on, I can't help but be honest up in here. But do it right, but keep on doing it, because you have our support. Because we're real excited. Because see, y'all got a boldness about you, and you don't want to hear that stuff. You've been hearing it ever since you were little babies. Like, really, y'all? Like, really? That's all y'all going to do? So we're excited about the way you see it and what you want to do, and how you're preparing for your future. And so, hey, we say we're all in. Go for it.
And one of the things I noticed, Reggie, that's different this time is there are an awful lot of young white children who are also involved. White, Asian, Latino. So I think that it comes from the fact that they've always gone to school together. Reggie and I grew up during the time when schools were segregated. Everything was segregated. The bathrooms, the lunch counters. We were like teenagers by the time things changed here in the South. Before we could go to school together and before we could eat together. And so our interactions as well as our lived experiences are different. That's why we see things differently. And I know sometimes young folks get very impatient with the elders, but you have to understand we are only what our lived experiences have been and what education and knowledge we've gotten since then. We were lied to in the history books just like the white kids were. Matter of fact, we got the history books after they had them and had torn out the pages and wrote all in them. Black schools didn't get new school books. So we had the old textbooks that they had gone through. So we got the same history they got. We didn't know much better. until we were older or went to college. First course I signed up at when I went to North Carolina Central was Black History. I wanted to know what's going on, yeah. And so Reg and I spent a lifetime, along with other people, learning, unlearning habits and ways that our ancestors taught us in order to keep us safe. Sometimes people will say, well, when did you realize you were black? I'm like, out of the womb. We could not know we were black. Because if our parents took us downtown to Hudson Belk or somewhere and we tried to drink out of the wrong water fountain or go to the wrong bathroom, there were repercussions, not so much maybe for us as children, but for our parents. And so in order to keep us safe, there was a way of life. There was an etiquette, if you will. There's a racial etiquette that we had to follow. So we have had to undo the way we were raised and the things that we learned growing up in order to stand straight and walk straight. And so that's one of the reasons I was explaining to my son the other day, why we see things differently. So I just tell you to be patient with your grandparents and aunties and uncles if they don't view things the same way you did, that you all do. We're getting there.
And we know change is coming. You know, I don't know how it feels for y'all. I mean, the way, talk to me. How does it feel for you all now, like right where we are? What does that feel like for you? Yeah, I knew you'd say something.
Well, right now, after George Floyd and that situation, all the riots that are going on, it's like all my peers have hate for the law.
Oh, okay.
And we feel like the law is us.
Uh-huh.
So it's like we're butting heads, and there's no way for us to like understand each other, put up in their shoes, because they've never walked in our shoes, and they don't wear the color of our skin. So it's hard for us to understand how they're thinking, how they're viewing us. And I just don't see a reform coming from both sides hating each other.
That's right. Nothing can happen. If we're going to stay on opposite sides of the pole, nothing will ever happen. You'll be old as me, and y'all will be still saying this. So you're right. There's got to be a meeting somewhere. I read a story the other day where a lady said, I'm really, really worried about my son. And this other lady said, well, why? She says, your son is a police officer. She says, but when he doesn't have on his uniform, I don't know what would happen to him. You know what I'm saying? She's like, when he's out there, just out there, I got to worry that my son will come back home just like you do. And I said, that's heavy, right? Because she's like, he's a police officer, but when he doesn't have on his stuff. So yeah, it's Go ahead, please.
Initially, when you asked the question about the title, you have to know what social justice is to recognize that there's an injustice to what is just. So that is the bar or the measurement tool, and we realize that we as minorities are short. We've been shortchanged the justice that's due. My question would be, because I do feel the synergy, I see that something is happening. You have, back in the older days when Martin Luther King was, when everyone was marching, there was a head person. And you marched with a purpose and there was a plan. Right now, because I was born after that, but not right here with them, there's no sense of direction. You just got protests popping up. And I'm like, what's the game plan? So I would want to know how to challenge or channel their energy into a game plan or strategy to recognize that laws have to be changed. So right now they're on fire, but without a sense of direction. So if that makes sense, they like, we want to do something. I watched a presentation at work yesterday, And it was from our African American BRG program for the company that I work for. And we had a minority male who had risen up into the ranks of the company, and his son was out protesting. And they've got the signs, and the son had a sign, and the father didn't understand, what does that mean? And the sign says, if you are with us, then why aren't you with us? So you have the young people saying, we're out here marching, and if you're with us, why aren't you with us? Because they're screaming for direction. It's like, we're out here, but so all they know to do is to keep marching. And marching is not, it's right now it's getting attention, but it needs to shift. It needs some direction. So I don't know how you would speak to empower them, and this is the perfect opportunity for we as a race to bridge the gap between age, that you have something to offer, the older ones have something to offer, that we take your energy and our wisdom, and together we should be able to do something. But right now I just see energy with no direction.
I agree, and that's one of the things that was troubling me. And I called Reggie and I'm like, okay, it's time for us to step up now. What should we do? Because you're right, we have the attention, but now what? And so I think we've spent the last few years of our lives looking at policy making, how to get petitions signed, how to change laws. Because many times some of the young folks will tell you what they don't want, but they can't tell you. They can't express what they do want. We don't want you to kill us. I'll say, okay, so what do we need to do? We need to look at, and I'm seeing some things come out now with, defunding the police departments, using money for mental health and for social programs. And so I thought, okay, they're working toward it. They're getting there. But I do think that that's when we need to sit around the table and talk about it, because we can show you, we can tell you who you need to talk to downtown. And there's a young man named Greer Webb that some of you might know. He met with the police chief, him and his group. He's a freshman at UNC and very politically active, always has been. And so he is kind of trying to lead youth into policy making areas so that we can get some results from all of this energy. I agree.
Based on another analogy that you used was that when schools weren't segregated, and now that they are, so they have no knowledge of that life. So you would think just by natural progression that racism die out. Somebody's still teaching it. I mean, so like, where is that coming from? It's not. We know it's got to come from the home. It's starting in the home with, because when you take children to a playground, they don't care what color you are, they just want to play. So at some point, where does the playground turn to a knee on the neck? And now I can't breathe. Where is...
Well, racism is an institution, and it's so institutionalized in every aspect of our lives that even well-meaning people don't realize that some of their thoughts and actions can be racist. And so it's really hard to deconstruct all of the institutions, like I named, the education, legal, healthcare. All of those are set up. They're doing what they were set up to do. So it's up to us to raise the mirror and say, we got to take a look at the policies and how your policies are affecting us.
I have a question, but first, to answer your question earlier about how we feel about being right here, right now, it's really interesting to me. I don't really know the feeling. It's hard to kind of describe, but when I was younger also, we were taught American history. And, it's not until you get older that you find out a lot of the truths, that were kind of covered up, swept under the rug. So it's just kind of really interesting learning about, the marches back then, and I've heard of the Kids March. I heard of that. Did you say it's on Netflix or?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna get the name from you later because I want to watch it. I know a little bit about it, but just kind of seeing it happen all over again, like, the energy and all that stuff play out like in my lifetime. It's like, wow. It's like we knew as, African Americans, Black people before what it was like, but like we know that we're treated unfairly, but it's like other people are now recognizing it and we're doing something about it. So it's really exciting just to be here living it. And then my question for you is, you mentioned earlier that, there's a lot of talk about defunding police departments and, possibly placing money where it, could be used to, progress our agenda further. What do you think about that? What do you think the pros and cons are of defunding police departments?
Well, I'm not an expert on this. I'm learning as I listen to it, doing a lot of research on my own. But some of it makes sense. If you live in a city where they have military tanks and riot gear and all of this money that's spent to protect the police, couldn't some of that money be used for other things? And why can't there be a social worker in a police station? Some of the calls they get, we do dump everything on the police now. If someone has a mental health issue, we call the police. If somebody, we just call them for everything. And so they're not social workers. They're not, I don't think we need them in the schools. I've never felt that that's the place for a police officer. My principal was our police officer, and I was more afraid of him. I know, right? I was more afraid of my principal. He had this Denzel Washington walk, and he walked down the hall. Even if you hadn't done anything, you were like, "Oh my God, don't let Mr. Color look at me." And so they were firm but kind people, And who was the boss there, and we just didn't get out of line like that. And I just don't think we need, because when a police officer is brought into a situation at a school, it becomes a police matter. And we know there's no justice. I know of at least one police officer here in Raleigh who resigned because he was working at the largest high school here, and he saw the injustice that white kids were treated differently from black. And he thought, I'm out of here. I can't do this. So that's why I say it's so institutionalized, even how kids are chosen for class. Who gets to take the gifted and talented? I had to fight to get my daughter tested to put into a gifted and talented class. Why? Why are all those classes white and then the remedial classes are black? So it's just everything just perpetuates itself.
When I was trying to explain to somebody how racism is in everything, I gave them the analogy of just like a brick wall right there. All of the little spaces, all of the glue, that's racism. It just rolls right through everything. You know what I'm saying? It's in every area. It's everywhere. We can point it all out, and other people say, oh, I ain't know. What? Anyway, so it's in there because it's been an institution for forever, right? So you say, well, what do you do with that? The playground, kids play because they don't care. But they go back home to mamas. They might say, you've been playing with them little niggas. You've been playing with them little nigga children. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? It's real. Mm-hmm. So it's in home, yeah. It's in the church, yeah. Right? Because churches got to touch it too. I never heard anything taught on race in church. Never. In my whole life. Wow. Ever. And I've been in church a long time. Right? And I was like, just like there are scriptures that refer to reconciliation. And I thought that must be in white people's Bible, because must not be in ours. We must have got leftover Bibles, apparently, because I never heard it taught or preached. Do you hear what I'm saying? So when you got places that you can just skip over that, we're going to deal with this, we're going to skip over that, deal with this, then everybody's lacking. Right. Nobody got it. So it's got to be in every area. Just like you've got to talk to your friends. It's like, you young man, You know, you say, okay, so it's a group of us, but we're sick of the police, and we don't like them, and we don't want to talk to them. But if my security system goes off, I'm calling somebody better come right now with a witness. You see what I'm saying? So I don't want it to be like, no, we're not going. Like, come police right now. You see, so we got to find out the balance. What's the balance for us? Reform, definitely. We got to have some reform, but keep those blue clothes on and come to my house and I'm screaming and hollering because somebody broke in or something. You see what I'm saying? I mean, it's just the reality of it. So we got to figure out what is the meeting place, you know? And also, speaking to young people and leader, whoever your boys are, you know who your boys are. You might have about 6, 7 of them, and y'all hang and y'all think alike. So somebody in your group, like you, has got to say, hey man, we got to find some people who've got purpose to their anger, who's got purpose to their protest, and let's do it right. Instead of, we're going to just keep going. We just go, okay, we're going to pull the statues down. Okay, we're going to pull it. What else can we tear up? Got to change that mentality to say, what can we do that's productive, that if it's in the paper tomorrow, it's for a good reason. You see? Go ahead.
The key is to turn your anger into action in some form or fashion, whether it's what you're going to be when you grow up. You need to strategically place yourself into positions to make a difference. When I think about the public school system, and like my son is at Southeast, and he was, and they have different tracks that you could put the student on. Well, if a parent, and we have to hold ourselves accountable as parents, if the parent isn't engaged, you've got Miss Susie done put your child on a track and you ain't even checking to see that they're not on the track for college. They're just on the track to just get out of high school. Mm-hmm. So there's an element of responsibility that we have. There's an element of responsibility that our youth have, but you have to channel your anger into action, whatever that looks like. If I just went by, and I have an African male son, social media and television would have me afraid of anybody that looks like him. I'm like, you can't, right now, and it's the thing, it's the fad. This is the look. So I'm like, I don't want you to look like everybody else your age. I need you to cut that hair, get a clean shave cut, and so you don't fit the profile that I'm afraid of myself in the elevators. You know, truth be told, I mean, and we as minority people, we have some racial biases about ourselves. Mm-hmm. And you have to be in touch with who you are and where you are and what you're thinking. And you know what? If the white man had just said what I just said, I'm like, you're racist. And I'm like, so, you know, sometimes we too ourselves can take that position, and it is justified because of years of oppression and years of seeing injustice to our social justice that we take on that mentality.
I like what she just said, channeling anger into action. And I'll say it another way. I'll say strategy over emotion. And I think emotion a lot of times is a good impetus and a spark for us to do something, but strategy is necessary. And if you look at the way the church works, we're in the church, and we use the analogy, Scripture uses the analogy of a body. How you have a hand, you have a foot, and the eye can't say to the arm, I don't need you. Like there are various ways to act. And I think that is very key when we start talking about strategy, because there is a lot of energy, a lot of emotion, but I think the strategy comes in and saying, all right, where's my spot that I can begin to make a difference? And for some, it may mean that in your group, Jamal, or whoever it is, that may mean you go into running for office one day. And you take on a political position. That may mean that you go into the educational system, become an educator, and you actually make sure you start pulling some strings and educating people appropriately. That may mean that you become a mouthpiece. You got a loud voice. You may not be coming up with a strategy, but you may have a spot to play the role in, hey, that's what we're doing. All right, y'all, that's what we're doing. You know what I mean? You just be that particular mouthpiece. And so I think that goes on both sides. So just go back to even defund the police. That is a way of basically saying, let's be strategic about our dollars. When we're making sure that we want to keep things orderly in our communities, we're saying this, not saying abolish the police, right? People are saying they're not saying abolish the police, but let's be more wise about how we spend and how we address mental health issues or calls that may be in the community. And so I just want to say that. I think strategy, acknowledging the fact that your ministry or your role in the fight may not look exactly the same as mine, but ultimately we are all unified in doing the exact same thing. And ultimately criticizing each other because it looks a little different is what we need to avoid. So
One last thing I want to say. The most impact you can make is voting. You have got to vote. And I am guilty of being a passive voter where I show up at the polls and whatever paper they sent me, whatever boxes they got checked, then I'll go check that. I am challenging myself now to do the research on the people. You've got to know what the person stands for. Do research. Just don't be blindly led to the slaughter. If you're going to exercise the right to vote, make an educated decision and not just vote whatever the sheet is checked. And I'm being very transparent. I've done it. I'm like, I don't even know who that person is. Right. They didn't have enough money for a commercial. Yes. So I don't see them. So you go with who, and it's all strategic. The money moves things. Yeah. So I challenge you to be in positions, not that money is the center of things, but recognize the power of it, and then you control the direction that you go in with that.
Right. It's a tool, and to add on to that too, like that's why I also think this is the time to renew our support of black-owned businesses. I don't think it's necessarily to say, oh, just because they're black, we're going to support them. Maybe that may be a good surfacing, but ultimately, you need to be able to vote with your dollars as well. Because when you go and spend money at a store, they're going to use that money, the profit they make from you buying, to advance their causes. And we're seeing like different corporations that are advancing causes that we aren't about. But guess what? We empower them when we go and spend money there. And so that's another thing that we can be strategic about. Our vote, but also our dollars. Where do we go to buy that thing that we could buy here, but it may not be as shiny as this one over here? You know, where are we voting with our dollars as well? Because it is a tool.
And then when you spend your dollars, then you help your community. You have to help sometimes raise our businesses to another level. And sometimes you have to be patient with our businesses. All the time. But it is a growth process. And they can't grow because the dollars aren't there. So you redirect your dollars, you can change your community. There's no reason why we as people shouldn't have many banks, that we shouldn't have these institutions that drive change. So I encourage you to be all that you can be, and I encourage you not to be silent. One thing I will say is that, back to the appearance thing, if you are interviewing and you have a minority business, and you've got clean cut buddy come in, you got bruh man, and so who do you choose? So we at some point have got to redirect our people that looks does matter. We get you can go through a fad at a certain age. Like my daughter's in college. Her hair had been pink, blue, purple. She said because when she realized when she get out to the working world, she's gonna have to get some regular color hair if she wants a real plain job. Just different things like that, not to take over the conversation, but sometimes we have to look within and then help push each other up to grow.
We give the last word.
So I signed all the petitions that I've seen online, but like if I want to do more, where would I start?
There are some local organizations. I know too much. There are some local organizations here, and I can get that information for you, that are youth-led, and I think that you'd fit in with.
You might share with people online as well, how they can get in contact with you, maybe to get that information?
Yes, I gave it to, she's going to put it on.
Okay.
And the last thing I'd like to say is, young people, learn all you can. I mean, I'm looking at every podcast. I'm reading every article. I'm in every magazine. I'm in every newspaper. Learn all you can so you can make intelligent decisions. Or you can hip your friends that you know won't read and say, hey, this is the deal. So it moves everybody. All the white people who come to me to say, but what can we do? I'm like, educate yourself. I am not your encyclopedia. I am not the one who put it out there for you. But there's no excuse. Learn all you can so that you can make knowledgeable decisions, that you won't have to look back and say, man, we blew it, we missed it. And don't make this a moment, make it a movement for life. Just sign into it, and this is where you go. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. I am excited, thankful for the opportunity, panel, our guest speakers. We have ran out of time, but we still have a lot to do. We have our next session coming up. We will have the Zoom link that is available for our young people to log in. Parents, we are asking that you please allow your mute. Here we go. Loud and proud. All right, how's that? Is that better, Reggie? Okay. So for those of you who did not get to hear me, this is just the beginning. We will be following up. We have many comments and questions for us to follow up to. We want to thank our panel as well as our guest speakers for an amazing session. Following up we will be back at 6 o'clock. You will have the link is online. There's a Zoom link. We're asking parents, please encourage your young people to log on to the Zoom link. There we will have a group discussion with a trained psychologist who will talk to our young people about their emotions and their feelings. They have heard a lot of questions, and they still have a lot of questions, a lot of feelings. And this is an opportunity for them to have that open conversation. We are asking that this is for our youth only. This is youth only time. Parents, if you need to speak with a trained psychologist, we will be following up with you as well. NC State has our CCERT program with trained therapists for you as well, but tonight we are specifically asking for our young people to be a part of this. Thank you and have a great evening.
A bullet in my gun. Oh, I got eyes in the back of my head, just in case I have to run. I do what I can when I can, while I can for my people. As the clouds roll back and the stars fill the night, that's when I'm gonna stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Can you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gonna keep on keeping on. I can feel it in my bones. The sun begins to shine. We're gonna start moving towards that separating line. I'm wading through muddy waters. You know I gotta make up mind. Any blood on the way to salvation, and I fight with the strength that I got until I die. So I'm gonna stand up, take my people